والنور الله لا يعطى العام.
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Inshallah, we will begin this week's lesson number 6, by looking at those things which, if found, GHUSL becomes compulsory and obligatory to perform. And I mentioned in last week's lesson that some of the things which we are going to look at in this week's lesson will be of a sexual nature. And there may be some of you thinking that why is Mufti Saab talking about sexual intercourse and these kind of rulings and so on, because, for God's sake, we're in the MASJID, why is Mufti Saab talking about these things? And I mentioned in last week's lesson that that is the beauty of Islam, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also more importantly the mujtahideens, the scholars afterwards, they've explained Islam in such a way where they have left no stones unturned. Meaning that every single aspect of Islam, every single ruling and masla of Islam can be found in books of fiqh, such as the one which we have in front of us. Now, the respective author, Imam Quduri rahmatullah alayhi, begins by saying, وَالْمَعَانِي الْمُوجِبَةُ لِلْغُسْلِ إِنْزَالُ الْمَنِي عَلَى وَجْهِ الدَّفَقِ وَالشَّهْوَةِ مِنَ الرَّجُلِ وَالْمَرْأَةِ. That those things which breaks your ghusl, or those things which makes it necessary to do ghusl, is number 1, the ejaculating of semen ala wajhi dafaq, when it gushes out, was shahwa, with excitement, min ar-rajuli wal mar'a, from a man, wal mar'a, or from a woman. Now, before we look at this particular text in a bit more detail, besides urine, 3 things comes out of a person's private parts. Number 1 is something in Arabic called mani. And mani, the English translation of that is semen. And semen or mani is a thick liquid which comes out after a person has sexual intercourse with his wife. Or it can come out when a person has a wet dream. And you will know it's mani, you will know that it is sperm and semen, because when it comes out, as we're going to look at later, it comes out with excitement and it kind of gushes out. It kind of like spruts out. It kind of like comes out and so on. So that is like a simple definition regarding mani and semen. The second thing which can come out of your private parts in Arabic is called madhi. And madhi is a thin type of semen or liquid which comes out, generally speaking, when a man, say, is kind of intimate with his wife. Now, what I mean by intimate here, I don't mean sexual intercourse. What I mean here is, like, for example, a man kisses his wife, a man is hugging his wife, those kind of things, like playing around with his wife and so on, touching her, stroking her. And then at that time, he feels some kind of like excitement, some kind of passion. But what happens is that some liquid comes out. And that liquid which comes out in Arabic is called madhi. Now you may be thinking, oh well, how do I know that this liquid which has come out is not mani, but it's madhi? So as I've already said, it's very simple, because mani is something which kind of gushes out. It's like, for example, you're holding just say, for example, there's a balloon, a water balloon. So just imagine the water which is inside the balloon to be like the semen and the sperm. So if you were to like break that, or if you were to throw that water balloon, it'll just kind of gush out all the water. So exactly same thing with the semen as well. With regards to money, that it's all stored in your body, but when there's a lot of excitement and passion, and then the passion and the excitement reaches its intiha, meaning the level, the highest level, and at that time, that's when all the semen will come out. So that is money. But with regards to mazi, as I said, your passion hasn't reached that level. So therefore, any kind of like water, any kind of like thin liquid which comes out, that is called mazi. And the third thing which comes out from a person's private parts is in Arabic something called wadi. And wadi is actually kind of a type of illness which comes out before a person urinates. So when a person is about to urinate, so because he's got this problem, so some kind of semen comes out, some kind of thin liquid comes out. Or sometimes what may happen is that a person, after he finishes urinating, so when some drops, the last remaining drops which you are trying to eke out from a private part, at that time some kind of semen comes out. So that in Arabic is called wadi. So three things which comes out from a person's private parts. Number one is mani, semen. Number two, madhi. And number three is wadi. Now with regards to the three, it's only in the first one, mani, that when a person has sexual intercourse with his wife and that liquid and that semen which comes out, or when a person has a wet dream and that semen which comes out, only in the ejaculation of that first category or the first type of liquid, only then ghusl becomes compulsory, only then going for a bath becomes compulsory and first. With regards to situation 2 and 3, that when a man is kissing his wife and he feels some kind of wetness in his pants, then that is madhi. And with the emission of madhi, ghusl does not become compulsory. Wuzu becomes compulsory, so your wuzu breaks, so you will have to redo your wuzu again. But ghusl does not become compulsory. So it's very important you keep this base ruling in mind. This is a lot of people where a lot of people get mixed up. And what tends to happen is that sometimes people, they kind of kiss their wife and they feel some kind of like wetness in their pants. So people thinking, oh, I need to go for a ghusl now. So in the cold weather, obviously it's quite difficult going for a bath all the time, every 10 minutes or every 1 hour, depending on how many times you're kissing your wife. Going for a ghusl every 1 hour, every couple of hours is going to be very difficult. So therefore, it's very important you keep this masla in mind. Remember, it's only at the time of ejaculation, ejaculating semen, that's when ghusl becomes compulsory. At the emission of madhi, then ghusl does not become compulsory. Wuzu becomes compulsory, but another thing which needs to be kept in mind is that that thin liquid which has come out, it's not pak, by the way. It's not pure. So even though the thin liquid has come out, even though it may be a bit, but because it's on your pants, so you have to make sure that you wash that before you read your namaz. You can't just leave that liquid on your pants and then go on for namaz, because in that situation, your namaz will not be done. But you have to make sure that you redo your wuzu and also you get rid of the liquid which is on your pants. Now, if we have a look at the text again, Imam Quduri Rahmatullahi says that when mani or when semen is ejaculated, number one, ala wajhi dafaq, when it is gushing out, and number two, with excitement. Now, from what I've mentioned, what we can gather is that your semen or your sperm is not stored in your penis area. It's not stored in your testicles. But in fact, it's actually stored somewhere in the back. It's actually stored somewhere in the back. That's where all your semen and everything is stored. Now, what this particular text is saying is that if semen was to pass from that area in your back with number one, excitement, with shahwa, with desire, and number two, it kind of gushes out, then ghusl and compulsory will become, ghusl will become farz and compulsory. Even though when the semen was coming out from her private parts, there was no desire and there was no excitement. So I'll give you an example. The same person, he's gone to sleep, and in his sleep he's witnessing a erotic dream. So in the dream he's seeing everything. So he then feels and experiences that from the back the semen has emitted. And because it has gone from the back with desire and with shahwa, so then what happens? He quickly wakes up, and what does he do? He then holds on to it. Okay, just holds on to it, like the way you sometimes hold on to urine. So he's then kind of holding on to the semen. And then what happens 10, 20 minutes later when he can't hold on to it anymore? The semen comes out. It doesn't matter. Even then, ghusl becomes compulsory. And the reason why is that because when it left that place in the back, it left with desire. So therefore, ghusl has become compulsory, even though when he is coming out from your private parts, there's no desire, there's no shahwa there. But because he has come out from the back with desire, hence ghusl becomes compulsory. I'll give you another example. Just say, for example, a person, I don't know, he was like probably messing around, goofing around and so on. And what happened? Somebody punched him at the back. Now, when somebody punched him on the back, say here where his sperm is stored, he feels something has left that area, some semen has left that area, and it comes out of his private parts. In that situation, ghusl would not be compulsory. And the reason why is that that semen which has come out from his back, he hasn't come out with desire. Okay, it's actually come out because he got punched in that particular area. So therefore, because he hasn't come out with desire, then that's why ghusl would not become compulsory. Unless, I don't know, if that person, he enjoyed that feeling of getting punched in the back, that's something different. But generally speaking, ghusl would not be compulsory in that situation. So what we understand is that the area where the sperm is stored, if from that area, if number one, money or semen comes out with excitement and it also gushes out, whether it's from a man, min al-rajuli wal-mar'ah, whether it's from a man or from a woman. Again, for a woman, they also can experience wet dreams as well, but they're not as frequent as men. But they can also experience wet dreams. So if they experience wet dream, where from their back area they also release some kind of semen as well, then obviously ghusl will also be compulsory and farz for them. The next ruling which I'm going to mention here, which is linked with this particular text, and that is that sometimes what happens is that a person, he has a wet dream. So he's had a wet dream. He wakes up in the morning, he sees that he's had a wet dream. So therefore, he goes for a bath, everything. And sometimes what happens is that after he has the bath, a ghusl, 5-10 minutes later, he feels that some kind of semen is coming out of his private parts. Now the question is that does he have to repeat the whole ghusl again or not? So he's had his ghusl, but after he's had his ghusl, some semen is still coming out from his private parts. So does he have to repeat the ghusl or not? So the masla is, the scholars have written, that if when he wakes up in the morning, when he woke up in the morning and he had his bath and ghusl, before he had the bath or ghusl, if he did some movements, as mentioned in the books of fiqh, like if there was some kind of harakat, if there was some kind of movement, and movement could be like, for example, he woke up and then he kind of walked for a bit, and then he went for a bath. Or like, for example, he woke up in the morning, and then because there was semen stored inside his penis, so what he did was that he went to the toilet, he urinated, he got rid of all the semen and so on, and then after that, he goes for a bath. So in that situation, if there was, after having a wet dream, before taking a ghusl, there was some harakat, there was some movement, then in that situation, he does not have to repeat his ghusl. However, if, for example, if he had a wet dream and then straight away, when the semen is still coming out, he didn't go to the toilet or anything like that, he did not move about, he just went straight to the shower cubicle, he has a shower, and after he has a shower, he feels that more semen is coming out, then in that situation, he will have to repeat the ghusl all over again. So the answer to this question, whether after having a first ghusl, after having a ghusl, if any semen comes out, do I have to repeat the ghusl or not, depends on whether there was some kind of movements or harakat from the moment you have the wet dream and until you have the ghusl. If there were any movements, harakat, whether it could mean urinating, whether it's something else, then you don't have to repeat the ghusl. If there wasn't, then you will have to repeat the ghusl. The next mas'ala we're going to look at here is the next ibadat, next text. Imam Quduri rahmatullah alayhi says, وَإِلْتِقَاءُ الْخِتَانَيْنِ مِنْ غَيْرِ إِنْزَالِ الْمَنِي, which means the joining of each other's private parts. مِنْ غَيْرِ إِنْزَالِ الْمَنِي, without ejaculation. Now the second situation when ghusl becomes compulsory and farz is that when a man, when his penis, the tip of his penis, goes inside the opening of the woman's private parts. And as soon as that happens, even though there may have been no ejaculation, even though there's no, the man didn't have the opportunity, say, to have sexual intercourse, as soon as his penis enters the woman's private parts, ghusl becomes compulsory. So even though nothing's come out, even though afterwards you check and you see nothing there, even the woman may see that, oh, there's no kind of like semen, no kind of like sperm or anything on her private parts, even then, as soon as you insert your private part, the tip of it into the woman's vagina, then in that situation, ghusl becomes compulsory and farz. Now from here, I'm just going to elaborate on this particular topic. I'm just going to mention a few masails with regards to the etiquettes of sexual intercourse. As I mentioned in last week's lesson, that people may kind of laugh at this particular topic, but the truth of the matter is that if the imams of the local mosques are not telling the people regarding the Islamic etiquettes of sexual intimacy, then what happens nowadays is people, they will go into Google and they will learn about sexual intimacy. But they will learn about sexual intimacy from a haram point of view. They will go into pornographic sites and they will learn about sexual intercourse, and they will learn about the different moves and how to do it, by doing a Google search. So they'll be doing it through a haram way. So it's the responsibility of the imams to actually talk about these kind of masails. And that's why I'm just going to take this opportunity, just very briefly, just say a few things with regards to this particular issue. Now, intercourse, even though we may think of it to be something like filthy or something like that, but when we analyze or look at the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we can realize that actually sexual intercourse is an act where a person will get reward. He actually gets reward by engaging in sexual intercourse with his wife. And it's mentioned in long hadith of Sahih al-Muslim, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, وَفِي بُضْءِ أَحَدِكُمْ صَدَقَةٌ, which means by fulfilling the desires of your wife's private parts, Buddha means private parts, i.e. by fulfilling her desires, sadaqah, you will receive a reward. Now the Sahabas, they were shocked and they asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that by having sexual intercourse we get reward. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam explains to the Sahabas that, look, if you had fulfilled your desires in an unlawful way, like you did adultery or committed adultery or fornication, so you would have got a sin for that. So similarly, when you fulfill your desires in a lawful and a halal way, you will get a reward and you will get a thawab for that. So therefore, from this particular hadith, we can understand and derive that sexual intercourse is in fact something which is an act of charity and is considered as an act of reward. Now, like with other things I mentioned before, that whenever you do something in Islam or whatever, something which is mubah, if you make an intention, then by making an intention for that thing which you are doing, you will also get reward as well. So I mentioned that many of you may go for work. So when you are working, you have to go work because you have to go and earn a livelihood and so on. But whilst at work, if you make intention that, okay, I'm working so that whenever I get the opportunity of da'wah, I will give da'wah. You're going with that intention of da'wah. So the 6-7 hours you're at work, you will get reward for that. You know, whenever you're eating. So whilst eating, if you make the intention that, okay, I'm eating so that I can get strength, and because of that strength, I will then worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, you will get reward and thawab for that. So similarly with regards to sexual intercourse, that when you are performing the act, if you make an intention, you will get reward. And what are the two intentions a person should make when engaging in sexual intercourse is, number one is that you should make the intention of procreation, i.e. tanasul. I.e. that I'm having sexual intercourse with my wife so that we can have children. So if you make that intention, then you will get reward for that. And this is mentioned in a hadith of Sunan ibn Majah, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that I will outnumber, like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's chahat and want was that his ummah will outnumber the previous ummah and the previous nations. That's why he said, Tazawwajul wadud al-walud. That marry those women who are loving and walud and who can give a lot of children, i.e. virgins who can give children in abundance. Why? فَإِنِّي مُكَاثِرٌ بِكُمُ الْأُمَمِ, because I shall outnumber the other nations through you. So therefore, when you having sexual intercourse, make the intention of children. Another masla here, masla number 2, is with regards to the sexual intercourse, whether it's a right of a husband or whether is it both of the spouse's rights or is it just the right of the husband. Now when we look through the books of fiqh, such as Imam Kasani rahmatullah alayhi's Badayu Sana'i, it's mentioned that sexual intercourse is in fact the right of both the husband and the wife. It's not just for the husband to say to his wife whenever, like, oh, I want sexual intercourse tonight. If the wife wants to have sexual intercourse, then the husband has to perform it on her. It's her right as well. Even to the extent that if the wife is constantly asking the husband and the husband is constantly refusing, saying, no, I'm busy and so on, then the husband will be considered sinful. So from this we can understand that the sexual intercourse or jima is in fact a right for, or it's like a haqq and a right for both the husband and the wife. The next topic here is with regards to how often should sexual intercourse take place. Now, some scholars have been more precise and they've said that it should be once a week. Some have said twice a week and so on. However, the most authentic, you could say, or the most correct opinion is that there is no exact limit of how many times to have sexual intercourse per week or per month. But instead, it should be done every now and then so that it maintains your chastity and also your wife's chastity. Meaning that you should do it could be 3 days, once a week, whatever, depending on your wife, depending on your scenario as well. But it should be enough so that you don't look at other women and also your wife doesn't look at other men. So it could be like once a week, twice a week, depending on the situation. Okay, so there's no exact number how many times you have to have sexual intercourse. The next ruling here is with regards to the haram times, or when is it haram to have sexual intercourse. Now there are a couple of situations when it is haram to have sexual intercourse with the wife. And we're going to look at that in more detail when we look at the haze section, the period section. And that is that when a wife is going through her periods, her menses, or if she is going through postnatal bleeding, which in Arabic is known as nifas, then it is considered unlawful and haram to have sexual intercourse with the wife. So it's considered unlawful and haram to have sexual intercourse with the wife during that particular time. And it's like these kind of verses tells us the truth of Islam, the haqqaniyat of Islam. And how does it tell that? Because a doctor, He's actually said that if a man has sexual intercourse with his wife during her periods, even though it's rare, but it is still possible, not impossible, but rare, a woman, she can become pregnant. A woman, she can fall pregnant during her haze, during her menses. And if she does fall pregnant, then the child which is going to be born will be born disabled. And that's why we see, like in many Muslim families, very few children are disabled. When you look at it, very few Muslim, there are some, but that's due to other causes probably. But in Muslim families, you see very few people who are disabled. And the reason why is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sharia has told us, has given us guidelines that not to have sexual intercourse with your wife during her periods. And it's only, I mentioned this many times before as well, that it's only when you go against the Sharia, when you go against the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when you go against the Sunnah of our Kabideens, of our pious predecessors, that's when you are inviting wrath upon yourself. That's when you are inviting problems upon yourself. That's why we see that many Muslims nowadays are suffering from stress, they're suffering from anxieties, grief, these kind of things. Why? Because they have left the Sharia. They have left Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when you leave Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then there's no one there to help you. And that's when you will see the pressure, the anxiety, the grief and the sorrow of dunya affecting you. So it's very important that, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sharia has quite clearly said, intercourse during periods is haram, so therefore we should abstain from that. And from this we can understand that because it's only haram to have intercourse during when the wife is in a periods or during her postnatal bleeding. So for example, this raises a question that if the wife is pregnant, so is it permissible for the husband to have sexual intercourse? So the answer to that is that yes, it is permissible. Even though doctors may say that you shouldn't, so that's based on a kind of medical point of view, which obviously if the doctor says that, well, it may be harmful to have sexual intercourse with a pregnant wife if she's very heavily pregnant and so on. So that's something different. But just generally speaking, if your wife, say, is very early in her pregnancy, 2 months, 3 months and so on, then to have sexual intercourse with her during that period is something which is lawful and allowed in Islam. The Jews in particular, they were very superstitious. And it's mentioned in a hadith of Sahih al-Muslim that they would believe that if a man has sexual intercourse with his wife who's pregnant, then that child who is going to be born is going to be born weak. He's going to be very weak, kamzor, da'if. So therefore, some Sahabas, they kind of refrained from actually doing this. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam found out, he said that no, there's nothing like that, and these are just things which the Jews have made up. So therefore, from this we can understand that sexual intercourse during pregnancy is something which is allowed in Islam. A couple of more things before we finish. The next section we're going to look at is something which in Arabic is known as mula'aba, or in English known as foreplay. Now foreplay and mula'aba, before you engage in sexual intercourse, is something which is very important. Something which is very important, you could say it's a sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's a hadith which Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi has mentioned in his Ihya al-Ulum, where he narrates that Sayyiduna Anas bin Malik radhiyallahu anhu says that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that none of you should approach his wife like an animal. None of you should approach his wife like an animal. Now why is the tashbih with the animal? Why is there a similarity with the animal? Because when an animal has sexual intercourse, there's no foreplay there. He just goes and have sexual intercourse. But instead, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is teaching us that when you have sexual intercourse, there should be you should not approach your wife like an animal. But instead, between you and your wife, there should be a messenger. As the Sahabas, they asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, what do you mean by a messenger? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied by saying, kissing and loving words. Meaning, like before you have sexual intercourse, you should kiss your wife, you should speak to her in a sweet way so that you can get her in the mood for having sexual intercourse. So that's what the hadith, this particular hadith saying, that you should not approach your wife like an animal, but instead, before you have sexual intercourse, you should, kiss her, you should like get her ready for the actual act itself. And what does foreplay include? So foreplay includes obviously kissing, touching, all these kind of things. These kind of things are all permissible and allowed in Islam. And then afterwards, obviously, the next part is obviously the actual act in itself, the actual sexual intercourse act itself. And just remember that the main thing which Islam says, I mentioned this last week as well, is that the intercourse or the penetration should be in the wife's front private parts. The faraj, the kubul, that's where the intercourse and the penetration should take place. So any other kind of place where you're going to have penetration with her, i.e. anal sex, and that is something which is haram. So besides that, whichever position you do, whether the wife is on the top, whether you're on top, whatever, as long as the intercourse is taking place in her front private parts, then that is something which is allowed in Islam. And I gave reference to the hadith in last week's lesson with regards to Hazrat Umar bin Khattab radhiyallahu anhu asking Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This hadith can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, which was the cause for the verse of Surah Al-Baqarah, Nisa'ukum harthul lakum fa'tu harthakum anna shi'tum, to be revealed. And that is that Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radhiyallahu anhu asking Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that can a man approach his wife from the back, but the intercourse, the penetration taking place in the front private parts, i.e. the vagina. So upon which the verse was revealed that Nisa'ukum harthul lakum, that your women are your plantation, and whichever way you want to approach them, then you can. So whichever way you're doing it, okay, as long as the actual penetration is taking place in the vagina, then that is lawful and halal. Other places like in her backside and so on, then that would be considered unlawful and haram. Now the next thing which I wanted to mention, which is actually linked with the actual text or what we're looking at regarding ghusl, is that if a husband has had sexual intercourse with his wife, so what is the ruling? Should they have ghusl straight away? Or just say, for example, if the husband wants to have sexual intercourse again, so does he have to have ghusl first and then engage in sexual intercourse? What should he do? Now the masla and ruling is that Islam has made it really flexible regarding this issue. And Islam has said, and the Sharia has said, that if you've already had sexual intercourse with your wife, and either number one, you want to go back to sleep, or you want to re-engage in sexual intercourse, it is preferable and awla that you have a bath, clean yourself, have a bath, everything, have the ritual bath, then go to sleep, or have the bath and then re-engage in sexual intercourse. If that is not possible, then what you should do is, you should at least do wuzu. Wash your private parts, do wuzu, then go to sleep, or do wuzu and then re-engage in sexual intercourse. And if that is not possible, then the very least Islam says, out of hygiene, it says that at least wash your private parts, then go to sleep, or if you want, then re-engage in sexual intercourse. So from this we can understand that if you have had sexual intercourse, it's not necessary for you to have ghusl straight away. If you want, Islam allows that you could just do wuzu and then go to sleep, do wuzu, re-engage in sexual intercourse. And Islam also leaves the flexibility that you could also, if you don't want to do ghusl or a wuzu, then just wash your private parts and then go to sleep, or either re-engage in sexual intercourse. And this is established from a hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Muslim, Sunan al-Tirmidhi and Sunan Abu Dawud, where it's narrated by Sayyidina Anas radhiyallahu anhu, where it's got the words that anna nabiyya sallallahu alayhi wasallam kana yatufu ala nisa'ihi bi ghuslin wahid. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he one night he had sexual intercourse with all his wives, and then at the end he just performed one ghusl, bi ghuslin wahid. So from this we can understand that it's not necessary to have to have a bath straight away after sexual intercourse. Obviously it is very preferable indeed. Now going back to the text which is in front of us, just finish this particular text off. It says وَإِلْتِقَاءُ الْخِطَانَيْنِ. As soon as the private part enters the woman's private parts, then ghusl becomes compulsory and first, min ghayri inzalil mani, even though there may have been no ejaculation. Okay, so even though, as I said at the beginning, that you could feel that nothing came out, even the wife can feel that nothing came out, nothing is in a private part, even then ghusl becomes compulsory and farz. However, there are some people who say that no, if this was to happen, ghusl does not become compulsory and farz. And they say that ghusl only becomes compulsory and farz if there was some ejaculation. Okay, so that's what some people say, okay, but that goes against what the majority of the scholars have said, because the majority of scholars have said, not just Imam Hanif rahmatullahi, but also the Imams, Imam Shafi, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad, they all have said that as soon as the tip of the penis goes inside a woman's private part, then ghusl becomes compulsory and farz. The next situation number 3 and situation number 4, when ghusl becomes compulsory and farz, I'm just going to mention it here, we're going to look at it in detail later on, is wal hayz wan nifas. That when a woman has finishes from her menses, from her periods, or when a woman finishes her bleeding after delivering a child, which in Arabic is called nifas, then it is compulsory that she has a bath. And as I just alluded to before, that there is a separate section which talks about women who have their periods and their menses, then how should she clean herself? That is coming up later. And then the next text, then the next section actually then goes on to say the situations when it is considered sunnah to have a ghusl. So it's mentioned in the text that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that it is sunnah to have ghusl lil jumu'ah. Okay, so there are 4 scenarios, 4 situations where it is considered sunnah to have ghusl. And the first situation which is mentioned here is for the day of Jummah. Now there's actually difference of opinions whether the ghusl which you are partaking or doing, whether it's actually for the day itself or whether it's for the prayer. But the scholars have written that if you want to receive the virtue and the thawab for ghusl on Friday, for the day of Jummah, you need to take the ghusl after sunrise of the day of Friday. So if you were to say do it at Fajr time before sunrise, obviously fair enough, you'll get the reward and thawab for cleanliness and tahara and purification, but the thawab and the virtue of the ghusl of Friday would not be achieved unless you do it after sunrise of that particular day. Okay, so you have to do it after the sunrise, okay, if you want to get the reward and the thawab. The second thing which is considered, second scenario where it's considered sunnah to undertake a ghusl is for Eidain. Well, Eidain are the 2 Eid prayers, Eid al-Adha, Eid al-Fitr. And number 3, wal ihram. So it's considered sunnah for a person to undertake a ghusl when he puts on his ihram. This is something which we look at in the Hajj section. Wa Arafah, and also when he is doing wukuf Arafah, which is on the 9th of Zulhijjah, one day before Eid. So where everybody goes to the plain of Arafah and does wukuf, stays there from the beginning of just before Zuhur all the way until the Maghrib time. He reads 2 prayers there. So during the wukuf and the stay in Arafah, it is considered sunnah to undertake a bath. And then he goes on to say, وَلَيْسَ فِي الْمَذِي وَالْوَذِي غُسْلٌ وَفِيهِمَا الْوُضُوء. And then he goes on to say what I've already mentioned before, that when madhi and wadi comes out from a person's private parts, ghusl does not become compulsory, وَفِيهِمَا الْوُضُوء, but instead wuzu becomes compulsory. So if madhi, as I mentioned, that if you are kissing a wife, some kind of liquid comes out, that liquid is called madhi, and for madhi, your wuzu breaks and you don't have to redo the ghusl. I'll just finish off by mentioning some other things before, some of the things which are not actually mentioned here very quickly. Some occasions when ghusl is considered mustahab, desirable. Now, the first situation is that when a person becomes a Muslim, now to become a Muslim, it's not necessary that you have to have done ghusl before. So it's not necessarily like you have to do ghusl before and then you have to come and say the shahada. You could just say the shahada even though you may be impure, and that conversion to Islam will be considered accepted and valid. However, because non-Muslims, we're not sure whether they you can't really trust them, they may have wet dreams and they're not going for ghusl and so on. So therefore we say to them in an indirect way, just have ghusl, so that the namaz they're going to read afterwards, that will be at least accepted and valid, okay? So I'm trying to say that it's not necessary that when a new Muslim or when a person is converting to Islam, that he has to be or he has to have done ghusl for his conversion to be considered accepted. So that's one ruling. The second ruling is, I'm just going to mention some other situation when ghusl is considered mustahab, such as, for example, when a person, after he bathes a deceased, somebody has passed away. So after you bathe him, it's not necessary for you to have a ghusl. However, it's considered mustahab and desirable. Okay, so those kind of situations, or like for example, when a person, when he regains his consciousness or sanity. I mentioned in last week, a couple of weeks ago, that when a person becomes unconscious or he becomes insane or majnoon, then his wuzu breaks. So when he regains consciousness or he regains his sanity, it's actually mustahab and desirable that you have a bath. Okay, and the reason why is that because sometimes what happens is that when a person, when he regains his sanity, or sorry, when he becomes unconscious or when he becomes insane, then because his body kind of relaxes, then there's a danger that some kind of liquid, something may have come out from his private parts. So therefore we say that to be on the safe side, that it is mustahab and desirable to undertake ghusl in that situation. A couple of more masala, one more masala before we finish is, I think I may have mentioned this before regarding smear tests. So when a woman has a smear test, then smear test involves that they actually put something inside the woman's private parts to check whether she's got cancer or not. So in smear test, ghusl does not become compulsory. Okay, so she will have to redo her wuzu again, but ghusl does not become compulsory. Okay, so that is the masla with regards to smear test. Shall we leave it here for this week? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to act on what's been said. Wa akhiru da'wan alhamdulillah.